here, moving in our midst. I worship you, I worship you. You are here, working in this place. I worship you, I worship you.
You are our way maker, miracle worker, promise keeper, light in the darkness. My God, that is who you are. Waymaker, miracle worker, promise keeper, light in the darkness. My God, that is who you are. You are here, touching every heart. I worship you, I worship you. You are here, you turn lives around. I worship you, I worship you. Waymaker, miracle worker, promise keeper, light in the darkness. My God, that is who you are. Waymaker, miracle worker, promise keeper, light in the darkness. My God, that is who you are. 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 Even when I can see it, you're working. Even when I don't feel it, you're working. You never stop, you never stop working. You never stop, you never stop working. Even when I can see it, you're working. Even when I don't feel it, you're working. You never stop, you never stop working. You never stop, you never stop working. Even when I can see it, you're working. Even when I don't feel it, you're working. You never stop, you never stop working. You never stop, you never stop working. Miracle worker, promise keeper, light in the darkness. My God, that is who you are. Waymaker, miracle worker, promise keeper, light in the darkness. My God, that is who you are. 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 That is who you
My God, that is who you are.
Rejoice in the Lord always. I will say it again, rejoice. Let your gentleness be evident to all. The Lord is near. Do not be anxious about anything, but in every situation, by prayer and petition, with thanksgiving, present your requests to God. And the peace of God, which transcends all understanding, will guard your hearts and your minds in Christ Jesus.
Hi church, just a bit of housekeeping before we start. The church is going to physically be reopening next Sunday, that's the 6th of September, and we'll do consecutively then every Sunday. We'll have one service per week, which will be at 11:30 a.m. Now, because of the government guidelines, it's going to look a lot different and you'll need to book a ticket. each week. You can't just book one ticket and then you're in every week. Each week you're going to need to book a ticket, book a place for church, because we're only allowed a maximum of 30 people in the building at the same time. There's links to our risk assessment and our policies, which you'll need to have a look at and a read and an understand of before you even come to the building to begin with. And also a link to a site called Eventbrite, which is the booking that we're using to book tickets each week online. And those links can be found on our Facebook page, on our Instagram page. If you go on our website, it will direct you to that as well. I'll even add those links as well on a comment below this actual YouTube video that you're watching right now. So you can just click on the comments, and then there should be a link that you can then click on, and that will give you all the information and the ability to book for future Sunday services. Don't worry though if you aren't able to book, or you can't make it within the 30 slot, or you're still sheltering for whatever reason, or you just don't feel comfortable coming to church. That's absolutely fine. Church is going to continue to come to you as well. We'll continue to film these. We're going to do a Facebook Live that happens as it's happening each Sunday at 11:30, and we'll also put this up on YouTube as well. So if you can't get to church for whatever reason, church is still going to come to you. We don't want anyone to miss out for whatever reasons. That's all said. If you need any more information or are a bit confused, first and foremost, join the club. I am very confused. But seriously, send us a direct message through Facebook or Instagram, and we'll try and give you more information and more help on booking and what's going to happen next and how that's going to work. But obviously, as the guidelines and the goalposts get moved and moved again, things are going to have to change and be quite fluid. So please bear with us. We're doing the best that we can. Nobody really understands how this is going to work or going to look. So turn up and be as confused as everybody else is. That being said, that's all the housekeeping done. We're continuing on looking at these issues of, rightfully so, worry, anxiety and hopelessness and stress and fear today. And they seem to be so much part of our lives and so much part of the world today. Go on and look on the news, go on social media, talk to someone in a socially distanced queue in the shops, and you will hear the same stories being told over and over again. And all they are doing is just heightening and magnifying and increasing these levels of anxiety within all of us. And so we're going to get to today one of the verses that people go to when they're dealing with this issue and this topic of anxiety. And it's in Philippians chapter 4. So if you've got your Bibles or your phones or whatever it is that you've got with you, we're in Philippians chapter 4 today. As we saw last time, all of these things like hopelessness and worry and stress and anxiety, all of these things are to do with one thing and one thing only: fear. It's fear of the unknowable and fear of the uncontrollable. And when those two combine, that's when our anxiety goes up. That's when we feel stress. That's when we feel pressured and usually act or think or do stuff or say things in a way that we would never do normally. Fear of the unknowable and fear of the uncontrollable. Now, technology that we have around us and rely on so much these days, and the social media that is so much part of our lives today, just seem to, as I said, intensify and magnify all of this. Because now we can see exactly what other people have and what other people are doing. And then we can compare it to what we don't have and what we're not doing. And this is the anxiety and the stress and the worry and the fear that I want to talk about and want us to think about today. So as I said, Philippians chapter 4, starting in verse 4. Rejoice in the Lord always. I will say it again, rejoice. Let your gentleness be evident to all. The Lord is near. Do not be anxious about anything, but in every situation, by prayer and petition, with thanksgiving, present your requests to God. And the peace of God, which transcends all understanding, will guard your hearts and your minds in Christ Jesus. Straight off the bat, I've just got something that I've noticed. Firstly, it's a bit dark in here. That's better. Have you ever noticed that anxiety and fear and stress and worry and all of the concerns that we seem to kind of grab hold of, have you ever noticed that they aren't always logical? Like how what we get anxious about doesn't always make sense, doesn't always add up. Now, I've got one particular thing that I struggle with. I feel a bit vulnerable sharing it really, but I have a real issue with whether it's a party or an event that's going on, or even just a social gathering or church. I have a real issue with, and I don't like coming into a room or coming into an event after it's already started. If I realise I'm late for something, I can already feel that kind of nervous tension building up. And I get these kind of weird feelings within me and these scripts and these stories that get told to myself in my head before I'm even going into those situations of you're missing things. There's things going on. Something's going to happen later on that's going to reference something that you didn't experience because you weren't here at the beginning. And the physical act of going into a room that's already full of people or into an event that's already begun just gets my heart palpitating. And it's crazy. You see, stress and anxiety doesn't always make sense. See, if I go into that room a little bit late, what's going to happen? Nothing. What have I missed? Probably, honestly, nothing. But it doesn't feel like that on the inside because it doesn't make sense. It's not logical. But no matter how hard we might try and kind of reason with it when it comes to our fear and our worry, a lot of the time it's just not logical. Now, there are times and there are places and there are seasons in our lives where we almost all feel and experience a kind of universal fear or worry or anxiety over something. It might be losing a friend or a family member, or particularly during this time of this pandemic and COVID-19, where it all feels very real to us. You know, we all feel the weight and the heaviness of the situation that we find ourselves in. But most of the time it's not like that. Most of the time, the thing that's stressing me out and keeping me awake at night is probably going to seem like absolutely nothing to you. And vice versa, the thing that's giving you anxiety and stressing you out seems and feels like nothing to me. So today I want to talk about what gets you worked up in your everyday life. Maybe it's the fear of not having a job. That's a very heavy and real reality for some people, particularly in this season that we find ourselves in. Maybe it's the anxiety of feeling like you don't belong, or the stress of having to start something new. Maybe it's the fear of coming into a church and having to wear a mask and having to sanitize your hands and having to sit at a distance and not being able to sing or kind of relate to each other in that way, socialize in any kind of way. Now, even though there's way more research and resources about this now than they ever used to before, all of these issues around stress and anxiety and worry and fear, there's all this research and this work that's been done into it. Even though that's all in place and you can read things, you can go online and read articles and study and see the statistics and all that kind of stuff, I feel like we're not really gaining a lot of ground on this issue. Even though we've got all of this scientific stuff to back it up and all of this knowledge and all of these skills and therapy and training and little apps on our phones that we can use, I still don't feel like we're getting a handle on things. I don't feel like we're getting a hold of this and dealing with it very well, individually, but also as a society and as cultures as well. When you Google the statistics on things like suicide and mental health issues, too often we try to go straight to these reasoned and logical and scientific things that these studies want to show us and just ignore or put on the side, put on the back burner, the spiritual and supernatural elements completely. Just like how we saw last week, that Peter said, cast all of your cares on God. Why? Because God cares for you. Paul now, in this section, wants us to know that if we give our anxieties to God, if we do that, if we cast those cares on him, then God's peace will settle over you. And not just that, it's going to be beyond all of your understanding. Now that'll preach. A message about peace, and not just that, but a message about peace that goes way, way past anything that we can even think of or imagine or dream about. That much peace. That'll preach. See, how often is it our worries and our stress and our fear and anxiety, that's the thing that goes beyond our understanding, where we can't figure it out, where it doesn't make sense, where we don't know why we're feeling the way we're feeling. We don't understand why we're acting the way that we're acting. We can't comprehend why we're saying the words that we're saying. Too often it's those negative things that are the things that go beyond our understanding. And for a lot of the time, and very unhelpfully so, the message from the church, using verses like these from Peter and Paul that we've looked at the last 2 weeks, the message is this: just stop being anxious. Just stop it. That's the message. That's the helpful message from the church. And that doesn't help. In fact, as we saw last week, that just makes me more anxious. Because now I'm having anxiety about my anxieties. Now I'm stressed out about the fact that I'm stressed. Now, like Pastor Pete used to tell us, now I'm worried because I'm not worrying, or I'm worried because I am worrying and I shouldn't be. And so I think that Paul is tapping into something huge here, not just for the people hearing this in his day, but for these people, you people hearing this in this day, in our day. Because I need something, or I need someone beyond my understanding to help me with my anxiety that is going beyond my human understanding. I need someone beyond that can deal with the things that I feel like are beyond. And Paul writes this: don't be anxious about anything. Now when you read just a little verse like that, Bible scholars will tell you that you have to ask some questions there. You can't just take that on face value, which I've seen people do in the past. So someone's worrying about something and someone will very helpfully, not really, will quote, Paul says, don't be anxious about anything, as if that's the answer. But no, beyond and underneath verses like this, biblical scholars will tell you you've got to ask questions. You've got to ask what and how, and don't be anxious about anything, because that's the questions that come up when you hear that. That's the question that comes up when I hear a verse like that. I think that we all need to start having this more honest and this more real relationship with the Bible, and not just going, oh, that's the word of God, take it on face value, but wrestle with it, question it, dig into it, look around the verse that you've been given to as this helpful quote and find out what's going on. Read the chapter before or the chapter after and try and understand what it is that this writer is really, truly trying to get at. And that will help you to what it's really, truly getting at within us. So as I said, let's look at the verses around this one in Philippians 4, verse 6, for some of the context to help us. And the word or the idea that we need to keep holding on to is one that we've mentioned already a few times today: beyond. Because if you're anything like me, the idea of not worrying or not stressing or not being anxious about anything, it's beyond me. I just go, what? How? It's beyond us. And that is exactly Paul's point here. It's beyond any of us. So I've got a couple of things that I want to point out to you from this passage in Philippians 4. So if you're making notes, here is your first heading. Heading number 1. We have to admit that it is beyond me. We have to admit that it's beyond us. Like we've been thinking about, this fight with anxiety is beyond me. See, this isn't my individual moment to shine. This isn't the hill that you are called to die on. This isn't any of ours time to fly solo. I can't just grit my teeth and white knuckle my way through this feeling. It won't work. I can't just hold that glue gun at that specific angle and just squeeze really, really tightly and just try harder. Because all that's going to do is leave me feeling more and more anxious. See, anxiety and treating it like this, squeezing it and trying harder, all it's going to do is result in shame, because ultimately we can't do it. It's beyond us, and so we fail, or we still feel anxious even though we believe we've cast our cares on God, and it results in shame. Because as you look around, everyone else seems like they've got it all figured out. Like they're holding it all together perfectly fine. Everybody else feels like they're living in this Philippians 4:6 life, don't they? You go on Instagram and that person's house looks fantastic. That other person's kids look dressed perfectly. That person's holiday, that person's car, that person's dinner, it's all perfect. And then I look at me and I go, what? And all I feel is shame. Because everyone else seems to be living this Philippians 4:6 life. Everyone except me. And all of a sudden it becomes not okay to not be okay. And this shame speaks into our anxiety. It tells these stories. It speaks these scripts into us. And then we get that spiral down and we're just getting worse and worse and worse. And the one beast of anxiety feeds the other beast of shame. And the shame beast feeds the anxiety beast. And it goes around and around and around. As we saw with Peter last time, Philippians is a letter written not to an individual, not even to a family, but to a full church community. It's to the churches in Philippi. And Paul is saying in this letter to this bunch of Jesus followers to live lives of joy. That's what the main theme is in the entire book of Philippians. To live a life of joy and to live a life of love with everyone. Not just fellow Christians, not just other people who look like you or believe like you or act like you or sound like you or dress like you or shop like you or eat like you, but everyone. And to let them know one thing and one thing alone: I am with you. See, when it comes to anxiety, don't stop celebrating. That's the message that Paul is using here when he talks about rejoicing. And I will say it again, rejoice. Don't stop celebrating. Don't stop noticing all of the ways that you are blessed. When you feel stressed, look for a way that you already feel blessed. Even when everything around you and everything inside you might be ready to just give up and say, I'm done. Now, I'm not talking about being unrealistic. I'm not talking about blindly ignoring what's happening, but it's continuing to, as we saw last week, get together in whatever ways we can. That may be as an online presence, might be kind of Zoom in together or whatever it is. Getting together and celebrating life together. Celebrating birthdays like we've been doing. Celebrating anniversaries like we've been doing. Enjoying the photos that people have been sharing about their little breaks where they've been able to get away over the summer. Celebrating in each other's successes and enjoying each other and rejoicing in each other's lives and doing it together. Notice Paul says that when you bring all your anxiety to God, then the peace of God will surpass all your hearts and your minds. It's not your heart and your mind, it's hearts and minds. It's plural. In other words, if you're struggling to do this, or if you're struggling to even know how to start to think about doing this, then just get together with other people. Get online in a community. And even though that might sound impossible during the time that we find ourselves in right now, there's plenty of ways to get together. As I said, it doesn't mean about getting that golden ticket and being one of the 30 that can come into the church building. Maybe that's the last thing you would even want to possibly think about doing. Maybe even the thought of coming back into the church building is giving you anxieties right now. You don't need to, as I said at the beginning. If you can't get to church for whatever reason, church will come to you. Community will come to you. Just please don't try and do this alone. We have to do it together. Paul is writing to this church in Philippi. And he's writing to this church in Oakham today. And he's saying we need each other. As I was reminded by a very wise man in a car earlier, it's good to talk. Just like we saw with anxiety and shame, feeding each other, these two beasts, anxiety and shame, that one feeds the one and that one feeds that one, and spiralling out of control, there's another two beasts that feed each other as well. And the one is the same. The one is anxiety, which is what we're dealing with, and the other beast is isolation. It's being alone. It does exactly the same thing. Anxiety feeds isolation, and then isolation feeds anxiety. And over, one beast just makes the other one worse. One nasty monster just makes the other one feel stronger and even more oppressive. So that's the first point. We have to admit that it is beyond me. Point number 2. We have to admit it's beyond my strength. We have to get to the point where we can admit that we can't fix it on our own. We can't fix it in our own strength and our own ability and our own persistence. Because how can we even try to beat something that's illogical and that's beyond our understanding and that doesn't make sense and doesn't play by the rules? We will never be able to defeat that. Not on our own. We can't do it. As Jesus says in the Gospels, if you're trying to deal with something on your own and in your own strength, you have no chance, no hope in hell, to pardon the phrase. But if you do it with Jesus, and if you do it in community, you have got every chance in the world. Because here, if we're trying to do it on our own, it doesn't matter how hard you fight, it won't work. Doesn't matter how many facts you try and get and how much you try and understand what it is that's happening to you or happening to that person in your family or happening to that person at work. It won't fix things. You can't fix it. See, just think about what usually causes us to be stressed and worried and anxious. It's the unknown and the uncontrollable, like we said at the beginning. And it's all beyond our strength. If something's unknown, I can't know it. If something is uncontrollable, you can't control it. Doesn't matter how hard you try, doesn't matter how much you train, doesn't matter how many 5Ks you run or how much you can bench press, you're never going to be able to fix it. And there's this other passage in one of Paul's other letters where he's listing out all of his achievements. He's giving all of these reasons on why he could boast, why he could brag about the kind of person that he is. He's giving you a list of his CV, basically. All the reasons why he could brag about being the best of the best. And he finishes it off by saying that he's not gonna. He doesn't brag. Because he says he just drops all of that. That's all just considered as useless, as rubbish, as worthless. He just drops all of it to believe in the Messiah, Jesus Christ. See, you can never keep all of the rules. You can never measure up and meet the mark. You can't trust in your own might and your own strength and your own talent and your own ability. Instead, simply trust God. It sounds easy, but a lot of the time it's hard to do. Trust what Jesus did for you on the cross. It's a simple gospel, and yet over and over again we make it hard. Trust what Jesus did for you on the cross. And part of following Jesus is about letting go of always wanting control, and always wanting to be able to be in control, and always wanting to be able to fix things on our own. Letting all of that go, surrendering it, giving it over, casting even that onto God. Why? Because he cares for you. Because when it comes to anxiety, we're making things worse by telling ourselves that we are stronger than we are. And we're making things worse by telling ourselves that if we were stronger, we would be able to beat this. And that's the story that's told over and over again. That's the story that's propped up. That's the story that's believed by a lot of people in the world today. If I can just get stronger, if I can just clean that mess up, if I can just tidy up then I can beat this. So that's the second point, that we have to admit that we can't do this in our own strength. And then point number 3, we have to admit that how we see anything is how we see everything. Paul says this in another version of this. Don't be anxious about anything, but in everything. And there's the connection. There's this obvious link between the words anything and everything. So the way to not be anxious in anything is in everything. To let go and to give it to God. Through prayer and petition, it says in this version. To stop being anxious about anything, that's a blanket anything, Paul says pray about everything. So when someone asks you for prayer, don't just say, oh, of course I will, and do the little prayer hand emoji, or have a plan to add that to your prayer list that you'll pray about that evening or tomorrow or later on in the week. No. Because what's going to happen? You're either going to forget, or the impact's gone. The impetus has left you. When someone asks for prayer, do it. There and then. Pray about everything. Pray about everything, in everything, with prayer and supplication, with thanksgiving. Let it, that's anxiety, be known to God, which surpasses all understanding. And it will guard your hearts and minds in Christ Jesus. This is that supernatural element that so often we try and disregard over the facts that we want to get the facts and the figures and the statistics and the logical stuff in. We want to get all that in our heads and we push the other to the side. But this here is addressing the supernatural. Paul here is addressing the spiritual. See, it's really interesting what Jesus does, because Jesus displaces our worry and our anxiety in our lives. And notice, it's not that there's no more worry. It's not that the stress is all gone. It's not that you will never experience anxiety in your life ever again, full stop, end of. No. But there's this shift of attention. There's this shift of focus. Because it's not at the centre of your life anymore. That thing that you're worrying about it is just putting it deeper and deeper within and putting it into the centre, and then everything becomes about that thing that you're worrying about. And anxiety will build and build and build the more you put it on the centre, because if it's in the centre, it affects everything else. But Jesus displaces that, and it's not the centre of your life anymore, and instead Jesus is. It sounds so simple, but what if next time you feel or experience any kind of anxiety, you just say a little prayer? What would happen? Instead of letting that work and work and work and turn over and turn over and turn over and bubble inside you until you can't do anything else, or instead of thinking, squash that down, I'll beat that in my own power, I'm stronger, I'm bigger, I can deal with that. Instead of those two, because that just feeds each other, why don't we just pray? Why don't we just say to someone else, I'm struggling with this, I need help, will you pray? Because Paul says that you get a sense of God's presence, and then you feel that God is guarding you. And then you get a sense that God is controlling everything. And that's how that anxiety lifts. It's God's presence, and then it's God's protection, and then it's God's control. And even if nothing changes in your actual circumstances, everything changes in the core of who you are. Can I explain how that works? No. Can I describe to you a step-by-step process of how that happens within your life? No. Because if Paul can't explain it, then I don't think I can. No. Why? Because it's beyond me. It's beyond my understanding. It's beyond my ability to communicate it to you through YouTube. Jesus promises peace, and Jesus promises presence whenever 2 or 3 are gathered. In our anxiety, we can discover the kind of peace that is beyond our understanding, that is beyond us. We can take something as debilitating and as crippling and as paralysing as anxiety or stress or worry or hopelessness or fear, and we can turn it in a moment to be about being with God and with each other. So may you, church, rejoice. And I say it again, rejoice.